In this video, we're going to discuss building and configuring rules. So we can access the rules page by going to this rules tab at the very top. We have a couple of options on how we want to roll out these rules. We can just create a rule from scratch. We can create a rule from one of our hundreds of templates, and they're both very valid options. One final way you could consider creating a rule is if you go to the events tab and you have a filter that you already have pre-configured previously. You would like to associate with some sort of action with it. You can easily do that from here. You can pick any of these filters, click on the little drop-down button, and just do a send filter to rule. And that will essentially clone all of the conditions for this particular filter over to a brand new rule, which you can then assign an associated action with it. But we're just going to start from scratch over here. So the very first thing you want to do when building a brand new rule, really, every time is to check our list of templates to see if we have a template that will suit your situation. It is far better to clone a template and just assign an action to it than starting from scratch. It's much less likely to have an error with it. These templates are all vetted. We know they all work. So it's much quicker, it's much easier, and it's much more likely to be successful the first time around than building a rule from scratch. So let's say we needed to build a brand new rule here for something like a critical account lockout. Okay, something we want to monitor our critical accounts for multiple login failures type of situation. We'll do that. We'll first check the template list and see if there's something that we can use that's appropriate for this. So we can do just a keyword search, anything that might be appropriate, such as account lockout, maybe, or critical account. Okay, so something like that. So we got critical account login failures. We can actually hover our mouse over this and read the description for it. This sounds like about what we want to do, so let's try and clone that. Well, let's go to next. Here you can see the rule conditions of this rule. This one's pretty simple, right? User login failure, where the destination account is in this list of accounts. Now, I may want to make a modification here because this list of accounts is actually a built-in user-defined group, which is a static list of accounts. But I may want to substitute that with my own list of possibly a dynamic group, such as the directory service groups. Okay. We've shown that in a previous video. So let's make a slight modification here. I'm going to click on Edit Rule. And instead of using this group, let's sub it out for our very own directory service group. I pull that up. We have a list of accounts that are pulled straight out of Active Directory. In this case, I could do something like domain admins and just drag and drop and replace that. Okay. Now, this rule, as it's built right now, if you look at this whole rules section, it's designed to fire off for every occurrence. So occurs at least one time in a 30-second window. Okay, so I may not want this rule to fire for every time in a domain admin fat fingers a password. That might be a little outside of scope or what I want to care about. So I could make an adjustment here and adjust some of these whole rule settings. So I could adjust how many times this particular set of conditions has to fire before this rule will actually trigger. So I could adjust this to say like a half dozen times within 5 minutes. Okay, that might make more sense in this context. Below that, we have this extra box called the response window. And the short of this is this box is designed to prevent old data from triggering new rules, because rules are designed for real-time alerting or real-time actions. We don't want it to fire off of old data, possibly hours, days, weeks old. Okay, so what this is designed to do is compare the detection time versus the insertion time of every event in this rule. So if the difference between those two fields is greater than 5 minutes, this rule will not fire. So the extra short of it is you only ever need to adjust this value here is if your top row is greater than 5 minutes. This would not work. If I were to save it like this, this would not fire. I would need to adjust this to be at least 10 minutes as well. Okay, but there's never any reason to adjust it downwards. That will do nothing, so don't worry about that. We'll just leave it like this because that should work for our rule. Now there is another important thing here called the occurrence instance properties. If I were to save this rule exactly like this and just configure it, it probably isn't going to work exactly as I intended because this is a list of accounts. So what could happen is I have one domain admin that failed to log in 2 times, a separate domain admin failed to log in 4 times, all within that 5-minute window. And that would still trigger this rule. That's probably not what I'm going for here. I want one account to fail 6 times before this rule fires, right? So we have what's called concurrent instance properties. I can add a condition for that. And I can essentially say, this is a good field for this action in this case. I could essentially say that I want this particular field, the destination account, to all be the same or all be distinct from each other. So all 6 of these has to have an identical destination account field for it to apply to this rule. Okay, that's exactly what I'm going for. So I'm going to save it like that. Now we have another option at the bottom called set time when a rule won't trigger, and this is also another safeguard against too many rules firing too frequently. Okay, so as far as rules goes, you want to make them as simple as possible while getting the job done, and part of that is making it so they fire as few times as possible while still alerting you to the stuff you need to be alerted about. Now, most of that comes down to building a really robust rule that has very precise conditions, but sometimes you can have the most precise conditions and it's still going to fire more often than you would like because you're receiving duplicate events for some important event you care about. There's a lot of reasons for that. But there's an extra safeguard here to prevent the rule from triggering too many times. So if I were to click on this is essentially forcing the rule, no matter how many times the conditions are true and the rule should fire, it's actually only going to perform the action of this rule one time every 30 seconds by default. Okay, so if this rule fires 10 times in a minute, you're only going to get a couple of those emails, which is much more manageable. But ideally, rather than rely on this particular backup option, if you will, it is much better to get the rule conditions as precise as possible to prevent those additional rules from firing. We'll go to next. We just want to give this this rule a quick name, such as domain admin login failures. Give it a description if you want to. You can add tags as appropriate, or you can just clear them all out. We have tags here for many different types of activities, devices, compliance frameworks, etc. Tag them as appropriate for you. Then we have some final options. Enable the rule after saving. So if you want to automatically turn the rule on and have it start doing its thing right away, you can toggle that on. You can also toggle on test mode. This is more useful if you're building your rule from scratch and you're not quite sure if it's going to work as anticipated. You may want to toggle on test mode, which essentially will still perform the correlations and still trigger the rule as necessary, but it's not actually going to trigger any of the actions you specify below. So if you were to set this up for a send email action, it's not going to flood your Exchange server with too many messages if it's not quite set up properly. Okay, and finally, what makes a rule is really the action piece. So this is where we set up the actions of what we want this rule to do when it actually fires. This default is an incident alert, which is something that's going to go on your security port that you can check off later and say, we looked into this and it was resolved. But maybe that's not what I want to do here. Maybe I'll swap this out for a send email action. We have a nice list of actions here you can choose from. I'll choose send email message, go to next. It's going to take me to the email configuration page where I can choose which template I want to use. Choose which recipient should be receiving this. I could add a recipient here. And then you'll see below that what the message will actually look like. So here's your subject line, here's who it's from, here's the actual body of the message, which is comprised of static text along with these parameters, if you will, these variables that have the $ in front of them. Okay. So what this is designed to do when the rule fires, it's going to look at the source event or events, and it's going to pull these variables or these fields out of the original events and put them into the message body. So you have more context and more detail in the message rather than having to just get the alert and then go back to SEM and look it up. Okay, so right now it's going to pull these two out of the original event, and I need to tell it where these what fields these parameters are going to correlate to exactly. So these ones are fairly obvious. It's literally labeled the field names that we want. So I'll just plug in the field names as appropriate, and that'll do it. Okay, now this is a complete rule for all intents and purposes, so I can click on create. It'll show up on my list. It'll be enabled automatically, and this is good to go. I'm going to pull up one of these rules and just have another look at these actions section for you. we do want to, we'll just pull up this one. I do want to clarify something here really quickly. For all the actions you see in this list, these are all dependent on what's called the active response type of connectors, the active response connectors. Okay, so basically all of the actions you see here are commands that are going to be sent back to some source device somewhere to execute remotely. Now, to actually send the command back to a device and have it translated properly, we have to have the appropriate active response connector configured and enabled for the send to be able to do that. Otherwise, the action will just be sent into the ether. It will go to nowhere. Luckily, most of these actions are Windows associated. You'll see we have disable domain account, disable networking, send a pop-up message, create an account, add and remove groups. There's all sorts of Windows related actions we can associate with here. And these are all taken care of automatically because, as we discussed in the connectors video, all of the Windows agents deploy with a list of Windows connectors already, and one of them is the Windows Active Response connector. So all of your Windows machines are going to be good to go. But what if you want to choose one of these actions that are not Windows specific, such as block IP? This will essentially tell your firewall to shun an IP address based on this rule firing. Okay, we don't know what firewalls you have, and there's no agent to install on a firewall, so this is something you have to configure manually under the nodes page and then the managers connectors subpage. Okay, you have to go there, configure the appropriate active response type connector for your firewall or your other device that you want to send a command back to. That's just an important note when you're talking about rules and actions and that sort of thing. And we'll go through one more example here just to show you what it looks like to build a rule totally from scratch. I can click on this Create New Rule button. And let's build a rule for, say, monitoring a USB mass storage device for file deletions. We can easily do that. So we'll add a couple of conditions here. We're first going to start off with we're looking for a file delete event. Whereas the field name, field name is going to be provider SID equal to wildcard USB wildcard. And actually, that's probably the only condition we're going to need for this one. This is looking at all file delete events where the provider SID is from USB Defender, essentially. So every USB Defender everywhere is going to have this USB Defender and then a 5-digit code associated with it. So this basically forces it to filter down all file delete events to just from USB Defender. And that's what we're going for. So very simple rule. We can probably leave this whole rule section alone because we do want this to fire on every file deletion most likely. So I'll just leave that alone. Go to next, name the rule. Give it a description, add my tags, enable test mode if necessary, find the associate or add my actions. In this case, I might want to do something like send a pop-up message to the user. Okay. Now in this case, the fields I have to populate here aren't quite as obvious as they were in that template. I have to choose the agent to send it back to. Now, if I'm familiar with SEM events, I know that this is probably going to be the agent that sends this event over is going to be the agent that I want to send the command back to. So I can just point it directly towards the detection IP field, like so. The account name is going to be the person that initiated that action. So this is going to show up in the source account field. You do that. And then finally I have to provide a message. So this is probably something I don't want to just pull straight out of one of the existing fields. That probably isn't going to make a lot of sense. So I could just switch this to a string constant and type my own message. Whatever you want to put there. We'll just add that in and create, and that is that. We can plug in a device and test that if we wanted to, but that is a pretty simple, straightforward rule, and it should just work. So that is essentially how you build and configure rules. Thanks for your attention, and we'll see you the next time.